Hello, everybody. Oh, yes. How are you guys doing? All right. It is wonderful to be here. I was just here in London last month. I'm coming back in December. I can't get enough of this town, apparently. Now, before we get started, just a friendly reminder, we do have the Slido. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. If during the talk you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand as well. And we are going to be talking about, well, a number of tips, tricks, tools that I had to mostly learn about the hard way over time from bitter experience. And just a quick introduction here. Yeah, I'll just say, to add on to what was shared, I've been teaching and writing courses with SANS for 18 years now, as I had other day jobs along the way. Most recently, I was the CISO in residence at this venture capital firm where we invested in different cybersecurity startups. Before that, I was the CISO at SANS. Before that, I helped build security teams and programs at other organizations in the US. Now, well, where did I start, though? Now, I have a confession to make. Earlier in my career, I had no idea how to talk to the C-suite. Silence. Has anybody else had this problem, too? Am I the only one laying bare my problems? Okay, I see some nodding heads. Okay, a lot of experienced folks here. Now, why was that the case? Why did I not know how to talk to the C-suite early in my career? As we can see from the bottom of the pyramid, I was focused primarily, and I was happy to do so at the time, in all of the various technical capabilities, technical activities that I was actually doing. Now, we know what differentiates a cybersecurity leader from a HR leader, finance leader, other business leader. What is it? It's the underlying knowledge, some knowledge of cybersecurity, right? So we have to have some knowledge of that. Now, early in my career, when I was purely hands-on keyboard, purely technical, I never thought I would go into a management role, a leadership role. I had no aspirations to do such. But here's a pop quiz, everybody. Try to say it with me all at once. The reward for doing a good job is more work. So apparently, I was doing a good enough job where I got rewarded with more work, increasing responsibilities, team lead roles, manager roles, more senior security officer roles, and so on. And as I kind of progressed, maybe accidentally in my career, I realized the technical stuff that I was pretty knowledgeable about, hey, it wasn't enough. And so this is where we talk about the old school versus the new school. Now, I think everybody has an understanding of this, as we've heard throughout various sessions here. It's not just about the IT and IT security knowledge. It's, of course, all of the other legal, compliance, regulatory, the never-ending alphabet soup of acronyms now that we all have to deal with on a worldwide basis. But it's understanding what are the business objectives, understanding the strategic objectives of the organization, and really managing all of those various relationships along the way. So what we're going to talk about in this session are three different things. The things that I kind of learned the hard way in my career, and I've observed partly from watching other colleagues, other CISOs, other friends kind of go through their career journey as well. And in this talk, I'm going to share some simple tools, right, that hopefully can help us put a little mental model around the challenges, the problems that we all face. And, you know, from kind of my career experiences, and, you know, I dare say that, hey, maybe I've helped some number of people get the next job, advance in their career, get the more senior job that they might be looking for in that time. And it's not, as we see here, about all of the technical capabilities. It's really, hey, how do you build credibility to start? So, from a credibility perspective, how do you go about doing this? I mentioned, right, the seemingly now never-ending stream of worldwide regulatory compliance and requirements and so on. We all know this. You all know this. You have to deal with it every day. NIS2, DORA, Cyber Resilience Act, SEC disclosure requirements, and so on. But there's a common theme. I gave you the answer. I highlighted it on the screen here. What is the common theme amongst many of these regulations? They all require you to have some sort of plan, some sort of strategy. Now that's a simple word, right? But underlying all of that, it implies that hey, you need to know where you're at today, what is the plan, what is your roadmap, how does it align with your strategic objectives, figuring out all of the different capabilities and how that helps support the business overall. So we're introducing our first simple tool. Now, I'm cheating here a little bit, because if you look at all of the words on the slide, it's actually a combination of multiple other tools, but it's what we refer to as the 3D blueprint, to have this process. If you're going to come up with a plan, if you're going to come up with a strategy as is required by the various regulatory requirements, well, hey, how do you go about gaining credibility? I have many friends that are applying for senior security roles, CISO roles, and they tell me, Frank, in the interview process, they want me to come up with a strategic plan that I would present to the other senior leaders who they interview with next on the next interview call. Has anybody experienced this before? No, just one person? Nobody's looking for a job change here. Okay, well, you're lucky to be happy where you're at, because the interview process, it turns out, is very challenging nowadays. Now, years ago, I made a mistake. I was at an organization, I was at a company, and myself and a couple trusted colleagues, we put together, in retrospect, was really a really good strategic plan. And we got a 50% increase in budget because of that plan from senior leadership. So we were happy about it. Well, then I went back to the team, my team, the larger team. I said, hey, we got a 50% increase in budget. We're going to work on all of these things. What did my team say in response? Gee, thanks. What else? You're missing a zero? Should have got a 500% increase in budget? Yeah, well, that would have been amazing. Now, did they jump up and down for joy, say, this is great? That's right. They said, who's gonna do the work? They said, Frank, why are you making us do 50% more work? Or that was the perception. All right, now, different question. What did I do wrong? Why was my team not interested in this plan? Say that again? That's right. Did you hear that? They weren't involved in creating the plan. I didn't involve them in creating the plan. That was my mistake. That's true. I didn't do it, because who did I create the plan with? A couple trusted colleagues, a couple trusted lieutenants. And it was a good plan, because that's how we got 50% more funding, but the team didn't want to do it because they weren't involved. So it's not enough to have a good process. You decipher, you develop, and you deliver, execute on the plan. Along the way, as we see at the bottom, hey, we know you've got to lead, motivate, and inspire your team to want to get the work done. But just like switching gears here a little bit, just like any successful attack, any successful campaign, arguably the most important phase of any successful attack is what? Reconnaissance, exactly. Now, the equivalent in our 3D process of reconnaissance is what we refer to as decipher, right? Just like the attacker, the adversary, is trying to decipher our organizations, hey, when you are trying to build your plan, your program, you need to decipher the organization. I've got a friend. We used to work together. He went to another organization. He got a little more money, so he went over there. And he was trying to come up with a plan, and he was frustrated with how slowly the organization was moving. So what did he do? He took the plan that we had previously created together in our organization and dropped it into the new organization to try to start doing stuff more quickly. What happened? Did he succeed? Not really. Not really. Because the plan was not tailored, it was not custom, it was not bespoke to his situation. He skipped the decipher phase, arguably the most important phase of the process overall. Make sense? All right. So I mentioned friends, colleagues, strangers actually, right? They say something similar. One person reached out to me, said, hey, Frank, I'm convinced that just by talking about the 3D process in my interview, I got the job. Interview one day, hired 2 weeks later. Because why? Remember, you're trying to build credibility. When you first start in a new organization, does senior leadership believe that you're credible? Not necessarily. As adults, it's hard to build credibility. Should I, right, we'll get to trust a little bit later. Should I trust people or not? Now, it's amazing. I've got a 6-year-old. When I go to the park with my 6-year-old, he walks up to any other kid, says, hey, let's do this, let's play. And the other kid says, yeah, let's play, let's be friends. The problem, though, is, hey, if I walk up to you at a bar, right, and I say, hey, man, you look cool, let's hang out, let's be friends. Right? So get away from me, you weirdo. Right? So it takes some time to build up this corresponding credibility. Now, we're all familiar with the fact that we've got, what, a 30, 60, 90-day plan. We know that we don't really finish everything in 30, 60, or 90 days. It's to get the wheels in motion here. Now, my 30, 60, 90-day plan, I like to divide it up into 3 different tiers. Is, hey, what do you need to do to lead up to your executive team? What are the business benefits? What are the strategic objectives that you are aligning towards? But also, you need to understand what your team actually needs. Right? Do an assessment of where your team is strong, not so strong, where could they improve? But you also want to think about, and you might not necessarily share this with the rest of the organization to start, especially, is the bottom row. Are you going to have the exact same job in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? You might be at the same organization, right? But within the same organization, you're probably going to switch roles. You're going to have different responsibilities, right? So you always want to think about, hey, what's your personal 30, 60, 90-day plan? What are your goals for that particular job? What are the transferable, fungible skills that you might take to the next opportunity as well? So this is the whole idea here in terms of building credibility overall. Now, what about trust? Somebody mentioned this earlier, right? It takes, what, a lifetime to build a good reputation and a moment to lose it? And so from a trust perspective, at SANS, our late founder, Alan Paller, he was doing a What Works series in CISO leadership, where he talked to various CISOs around the world and various board members. This one board member said, hey, a big part of being believable, building our trust, is showing us how we compare to competitors, other industries, some kind of standards or benchmarks, right? What does this mean? Well, this means that, hey, we need to use these industry-recognized frameworks. Now, here's a simple mental model. Has anybody downloaded the PDF documents of all of the various security cyber frameworks and tried to read them? Yeah. Now, we're supposedly all cybersecurity experts here in the room, and when you download those PDFs, it's kind of hard to read, right, and make sense of all of them. And as a result, what I found is very helpful is to use what we call here this cyber framework formula. Simple mental model to divide up your frameworks into 3 different categories that we see here on the slide. And some of you might have heard this before because I mention it all the time. Let's start with an analogy. Let's pretend that I want to be a world-class chef, but I don't know anything about cooking, but I've got this desire to do so. So I need to, 1, understand what are all of the ingredients that could potentially be used in various dishes, in various recipes. When I go to the market, I might be at the beginning overwhelmed, inundated with all of the ingredients on the shelves and not know what to buy. So we need to have a listing of what are the potential ingredients. Those are what we refer to as the various control frameworks. All right? All the things that you could possibly put in your dish or your security program. Now, just because you know what the ingredients are doesn't mean you'll make a good dish. You need to follow some best practices. And as a chef, the best practices come in the form of a recipe in a cookbook, right? So what's the appetizer, what's the entree, what are the right measurements, and so on. So those come to us from a security perspective in the form of various program frameworks. How do you assemble them together in ways that have been shown to work before? Now, just because I know how to make a good dish doesn't mean I'll have a successful restaurant. That depends on what? My understanding of what the customers want, what kind of vibe they want, what type of ambiance, what type of food, what type of price point, location, and so on. So similarly at work, we need to implement different security capabilities based upon what the business wants. And the way that we prioritize what to do is by analyzing the risk to the organization. So depending on the maturity of your program, right, you're going to implement at least one framework in each of these categories. All right, does that make sense? I've got a friend. Years ago, he was the head of security at a small healthcare company in the US, a billion-dollar company. That's small for healthcare. It merged with another billion-dollar healthcare company, creating a $2 billion healthcare company, right? It turns out he had a small team. It was him and 3 other people. When they merged with the other company, it turns out he was now the head of security for this new $2 billion company because the other company had no dedicated security team. All right? And then what happened? The board said, the chair of the board, she said, hey, we need a briefing on cybersecurity. We're now this new $2 billion company. So it fell upon my friend to do his first obligatory 15-minute board briefing. How do you think he felt? How would you feel? How do you think he felt? Scared, yes? Nervous? Yes. So what did he do? He went in and he prepared some slides, of course. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. But he at the time, he was using the CIS critical controls, right? Previously known as the SANS critical security controls, of which there were 20 at the time. And it turns out he had been using that, and he color-coded it red, yellow, and green. Most of the items were red. Some yellow, very few were green. And a few minutes, 5, 10 minutes into this presentation, the chair of the board stops him and says, hey, we're a $2 billion company. Is this it? This is what we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective? That's effectively what she said. And he nervously replied, yes, this is what we're doing. This is the current state of affairs. To his great relief, the chair of the board said, well, she didn't hammer him. She said, well, we as an organization need to make sure that we've got the right level of investment, that we've got, right, the appropriate oversight, the appropriate governance, and so on. Right? So she didn't blame him. Rightly so. It wasn't honestly his fault. Now, he accidentally, though, did 2 things right. What are they? Say that again? Maturity? Truth. He told the truth. Yes, he was honest. He was transparent, right? Because if he tried to cover it up, eventually, right, it would have been revealed. And yeah, so he was very nervous because it's very easy in a high-pressure situation like that to maybe make things sound a little bit better than they are. But he was very transparent, right? Very honest. Good. The other thing he maybe inadvertently, accidentally did was data. He had data, red, yellow, green. Build trust. He built trust by using an industry-recognized framework. He probably explained for 20 seconds, hey, this is the critical security controls industry-recognized framework that helps mitigate 80% of known issues at the time. And to be honest, right, that's more of a control framework, so it provides the initial technical roadmap. But that gave the board member some confidence that he didn't just make this up. Right? There were other people in the industry that were actually using this. Right? And we see that's what the board member said. The board member says, hey, show us how we can use some industry-recognized benchmarks, which leads to this. If you glance at this slide, does anybody have a slide like this at work? Oh, I should hopefully see more hands go up, quite a number of hands, right? If you don't, highly suggest you have a slide like this, because leadership wants to know, right? What is the current state, the dark shade of blue? What is your target state, the light shade of blue, implying that you've done a lot of analysis, thinking about where you want to actually potentially invest. And notice, there's the yellow line. Now, in the real world, you're not going to have just one straight yellow line like I just made this one up, right? I just put this on the slide. In the real world, there are different places for each of the cybersecurity functions on the y-axis. All right? And then this is answering the other question the board member had. The other question was, from 2 slides ago? Show us how we compare. Show us how we compare to others in the industry. Some years ago, I had a meeting with my CFO, and my personal secret agenda, which was obvious, was to eventually, not in that meeting, but to soften up my CFO to eventually get her to be more amenable to increasing the security program budget, to buying off on our business case. And, she was much smarter than I was, of course, and about, a few minutes into the meeting, she said, Frank, we get it. We in finance know cybersecurity is important, but are we spending too much? Are we spending too little? How are we spending? How are we doing in comparison to our industry peers? She was asking for, well, what's the yellow line? All right, what's the yellow line? All right, I'm going to pause for a moment. Any questions so far? Any comments? All right. Now, speaking from a senior leadership perspective, from a board of directors perspective, who here has ever either had to present to the board or prepare materials, slides, and so on, that are presented to the board? All right, huge percentage of hands going up. So, unless you work at a technology company, the board of directors, they don't really know anything about technology. And by extension, they don't necessarily know much about cybersecurity either. What they care about are, well, what are the cyber risks associated with our various activities? If we embark on this new business endeavor, can you illustrate what the cyber risks actually are? How could we mitigate those corresponding risks? And oh, by the way, another risk is, what's our cybersecurity succession plan? Just last week, I had a meeting with one of the largest energy companies in the world, and they had a long-tenured CISO who unexpectedly left. And so it left them in a little bit of a lurch. So they eventually brought in a new CISO from outside, but they realized they have to do more internal succession planning, just like they do for every other senior executive position in the organization. But similar to what my CFO said, right, they want to know, the board wants to know, how are we doing in comparison to others, in relation to these industry-recognized frameworks? All right, now, a lot of you raised your hand about presenting to the board or preparing various materials. You guys know the RSA conference? It turns out at the RSA conference, they've got a separate group called ESAF, the Enterprise Security Action Forum. Is anybody here a member of that? One person in the back. So you will know that this is a group of global 2,000 CISOs that get invited to be part of this group. And then what they did, though, to highlight here, is they collected real board presentations that these CISOs did, anonymized them, and then analyzed them to see, well, what were the similarities? What are the common things that CISOs present to the board of directors? And I was very happy to see this because I maybe accidentally, inadvertently, have presented similar things in the past. Is what are the changes to the risk landscape? Do we have any notable internal incidents, or are there other notable industry incidents? And the board is always going to ask. You know what they're going to ask? Can this happen to us? Right? Will this happen to us? You want to pre-answer that question, right? Highlighting the various risks. But every CISO also, in their own way, conveys what? The equivalent of the bar graph that we showed a few slides ago. What is our maturity in comparison to others, and what initiatives are we adopting, implementing to close the gap, right? To increase our maturity in these various areas. I heard a story of a CISO. Did his first board presentation. Pop quiz, everybody. In your 15-minute board presentation, how many slides should you take in? I heard 1, as few as possible, 2 to 5. So we have the current range of 0 to 5 right now. Now, that is the correct answer. That's the correct answer. Now, I always have many other slides in my deck, but they're in the appendix. All right? I plan to present usually no more than 3 slides. Now, usually what happens, though, the CISO's time in the board meeting gets crunched because other sessions go long, and then instead of your 15 minutes, you might have 9 minutes, you might have 7 minutes, you might have 3 minutes. So you have to be ready to present 0 slides, right? But if you do have your full time, if you do have your full time, well then you could present maybe five maximum, maybe, all right? But I heard a story of a CISO. He went into his first board presentation with 30 slides, 3-0. After the meeting, he went back to his office. His team was waiting for him because they knew it was his first board presentation. They said, "How did it go?" He said, "It went great. I got through all 30 of my slides." The boardroom doors closed, and what do you think the board said about him? I can't hear you guys? Yeah, what was all that for? Yeah. Now, the board is not going to hire and fire the CISO, right? Now, the board does hire and fire the CEO, right? But so he didn't lose his job, but the doors closed, and the board said, "I never want to see that guy again." Because he treated it as an information dump, right? It was not an information dump. The board, even though they might not be technologically savvy, they are knowledgeable in many other areas of risk overall to the organization, various business drivers, and so on. So the main thing to think about is not what information you can share, is, hey, you want to make sure that the board feels confident. Confident that what? You know what you're doing, that you've got a plan. Going back to that credibility, you've got a plan for a plan. You might not have the plan right now if you just started last week, but at least you have a plan for a plan, right? And you build some credibility and trust with them. And you should want them to feel confident and say that, hey, you know what you're doing, and the organization is in good hands. That's it. That's it. So how much are you going to talk to them about technical security items? Well, unless they ask the question, right, probably not much. The first big executive job that I had, the people that were hiring, the senior VPs, they knew that I had a technical background. They said, "Frank, in this job, how much technical work do you think that you're going to do?" Now, I'll give you a little context. This was at the time, $90 billion company, right? And there would have been like 50 people on my team. So what was the correct answer? How much technical work would I do in that role? That's right, 0, none. Now, in a team of that size, it's 0. The technical background and knowledge, the bottom of the pyramid, is what? To make sure that the team is on the right track, that you're directionally moving in the right direction, that you can nudge them in the right direction if needed, right? If needed. It's not to do the technical work itself. Now, side note, probably 80% of my career has been at large enterprises, 20% at smaller organizations, smaller teams. So if you have a smaller team, then sometimes you might need to do some element of rolling up your sleeves. But in a large organization, right, that's not going to be the case, right? Because you're focused on what? On this, right? The confidence, instilling confidence, building trust with the rest of the leadership. Now, this brings us to partnership here. I like to think about the fact that there are 3 types of CISOs. Number 1, there's the traditional CISO as dictator. You've met these CISOs before? Hey, sometimes, you have to, make some hard decisions. But we know in the modern enterprise world, hey, you can't be a quote-unquote dictator all the time, right? But number 2 is CISO as a collaborator, right? That's good, because when there's a business problem, when there's a business risk, they come to you for advice, and they come and ask you, hey, well, what should we do? What do you think? That's good. But then the third one is CISO as a partner. Now, what's the difference between a partner and a collaborator? The collaborator is you only get asked to come to the table when there's a problem, right? The partner is when you've got a seat at the table all the time, right? Because you understand what the various business drivers are. Now, a couple other simple tools here. At a high level, we in security, we only do 2 things. What do? We protect the organization, preventing bad stuff from happening. And that is historically what most security teams have done and focused on. But on the flip side, we also enable good things to happen right, by enabling various business outcomes, various business initiatives, and so on. So what I'm going to talk about here in the next couple slides are two simple tools to do just that. Is what do we do to understand how to protect the organization, the cyber risk map, and what do we do to enable the business, the strategy map. Both of them are related to a crosswalk to your underlying security capabilities. Now, if you squint at the back here and look at the very bottom row, we've got the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we know that our teams are implementing things, doing a bunch of stuff to make sure that we have CIA. Now, I'm going to exaggerate a little here. Does senior leadership care in and of itself about CIA? Oh, I see some shaking heads. No, they don't care. They assume, right, that you're taking care of that. Right? Turns out that senior leadership doesn't care about your cyber expertise, your team's cyber expertise. They assume, right, that you've got the appropriate cyber expertise. What they care about is how those technical items that allow you to implement CIA map back to their various business processes and ultimately, right, what the customer actually cares about, the internal stakeholders actually care about. Maybe improved compliance, maybe more secure features, maybe improved customer satisfaction, and so on, building trust along the way. Right? So this basic strategy map tool helps you do a crosswalk with your various high-level capabilities. Make sense? All right. So related to that, part of this is putting together your business case. And in your business case, you want to show how you align with what? Support various business objectives. Now, over the years, I've kind of done this, to be honest, in maybe a little bit of a haphazard way. All right? Now, it wasn't until, though, that I saw this presentation by Jeff Pollard, right, where he gave at a different SANS Leadership Summit a talk called, hey, your cyber program is a profit center, not a cost center, where he very succinctly summarized the stuff that I had maybe inadvertently, accidentally been doing haphazardly over the years, highlighting the fact that, hey, you don't want to just implement a bunch of technology, security controls. You need to understand, well, what customers care about that, count your number of customers, what amount of revenue is associated with those customers, how much does it cost to adopt, implement those capabilities, and therefore, you've got now a corresponding reason to implement these various capabilities. Right, so here are some examples. Right, if you squint right at the back, you could see this in terms of X number of customers require a SOC 2 Type 2, X number of customers require ISO 27001, X number of customers, right, require various other certifications, X number of, right, or entities are required to meet the NIS2 requirements and various controls, whatever it might be. Then you map that back to revenue, right, or the impact of your organization, talk about the corresponding cost, and then you do a little bit of math, and then you can figure out on the right-hand side, hey, well, what does this actually mean? And the cost per customer, if you divide it all out, is going to be relatively small. Right? So you can go to leadership and say, hey, part of the case is, well, if we spend 1,000 quid per customer, hey, did you think that's reasonable? Right? Whatever it might be in your actual situation. Make sense? Who here has done something like this before at work? A few people, just a handful of folks. If not, highly suggest starting to implement, adopt something like this to make your case. Now, we come all this way, and I have not mentioned the buzziest of buzzwords in the entire industry, right? Which is, of course, AI, right? Now, we're talking about AI here because it's not an exaggeration to say that AI is, yes, even at this early stage, the most transformational technology of our generation, which means what? Which means it's going to have a huge impact across all sectors of society. And we're going to talk about impact here on the next slide, but to highlight it, right, hey, there's a lot of conflict happening around AI. It's not just a race from the various technology companies, the model providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral in France, and so on, to create the best model to eventually achieve AGI, artificial general intelligence, superintelligence, whatever you want to call it. It's not just a competition amongst that there is a gating factor in terms of training all of these models. Does anybody know what the gating factor is? What's your guess? The gating factor is, well, there's a number of gating factors. Let's go down the stack. The gating factor is chips, compute, infrastructure. The leading provider of GPUs that are used for training and inference of AI is NVIDIA. Now, they don't manufacture them. TSMC in Taiwan manufactures them, right? Now, there's another problem. The other gating factor is not only the availability of chips, of compute, just because you sign up with a cloud provider, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and you say, hey, I need GPU access, doesn't mean that you're going to get it, right? Because it's limited. But it's also limited based upon power. Does Europe have unlimited power? That was supposed to be a slight joke. Yes, the US doesn't have unlimited power either. You know who, by comparison, has more levels of power? China. China has supposedly a lot of excess power capacity. And if power is one of the gating factors for AI, hey, they could potentially, over time, develop even more of an advantage in that area. So that's why there's huge conflicts about who has access to chips, who has access to the minerals, the rare earth minerals that are used to create the various chips. And as we know, there's going to be downstream economic and social consequences here, in addition to, hey, the technology. From a technology perspective, it's not only the infrastructure, the GPUs, the chips, it's the model competition, and it's the data competition as well, in terms of training all of the models. So all of these different areas, right, potentially have a huge impact on your organization, depending on the nature, right, of your business, your organization, right, your organizational objectives. Now, how do we highlight this? You know that if you're trying to connect with the CEO or other executives, a common question that we as security people will ask the CEO is, hey, Mrs. CEO, what keeps you up at night? Right? Has anybody asked this question before? No, just a few of us? What are you asking everybody? Yeah, that is a common question. Common question. Now, is that a good question or a bad question? It's good. It's not a horrible question, right? But I would say it's not the best question. Because when you ask the CEO what keeps you up at night related to cyber, most CEOs, they don't know. The CEO is relying on you to decipher the business, the situation, decipher based on your understanding of the threat landscape, and then figure out, right, what are the cyber risks to the organization. So for you to figure out what the cyber risks are, I would say a better question to ask is, what do you, Mr. and Mrs. Executive, think are the most important processes in the organization? Because when they highlight the most important process, and this was mentioned numerous times, what, Jaguar Land Rover? How long did it take them to get back to operation? Right? We've got these various outages and so on. So in those cases, what, the manufacturing process, or maybe the shipping process, or maybe the payment processing, whatever it might be that's going to have the biggest, what we're trying to get to here is the second row, the biggest impact. What is the thing that's the biggest impact for your organization? Your technical security teams are primarily focused on what? On the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, and the threats. And rightly they should. They need to understand that. But your job is to translate that into the impact for the organization. Right? Remember, that's what the board member also wants to figure out. So you don't just jump straight to talking about on the far right-hand side the mitigations. You don't talk about that we're going to implement cloud control A, B, and C, and AI control X, Y, and Z. That's part of the larger program, right, of resiliency or your AI, cloud and AI security program, and so on, right, that provides the mitigations, the mitigating controls, to minimize the corresponding impact. You guys know there's the IOD, Institute of Directors, here in the UK, other European countries. Back home, there's the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. They all say, hey, the board members who's providing guidance to the organization, they say, you, the board member, You should be asking your senior leadership, do we know what the crown jewels are and where they are? We all know that. We all know that the crown jewels are important. But then, well, for our teams, they have to take the next step. The next step is figuring out the impact to the organization. It's not just enough to understand what we think the crown jewels are. Right? We've got to understand the impact to the organization. And we understand all of this because we want to figure out what do we prioritize. So when you put together your business case to hopefully get 50% or 500% more in funding, right, what do you have to do? I made a mistake a long time ago. I put together a business case, and the business case had one option. Right? So when I presented the business case to leadership, leadership didn't just say, okay, here's all the money. They said, well, what if we do a little bit less of this? What if we do a little more of this? And what if we do a little bit less of this? And so there was a lot of back and forth. So now I always provide 3 options, the low, medium, and high, with differing levels of business value, risk reduction, and corresponding cost. You're pre-turning some of the dials for senior leadership. Now, they're not going to agree immediately, right? But it gives them less, it gives you you pre-turn some of the dials for them so that, hey, they don't have as many questions. Now, which one of these, A, B, or C, is going to always be your recommendation? B. Yes, you're always going to suggest, your recommendation is always going to be the middle one. Now, what if they choose option A? How do you feel? You got something. You feel like you need to explain the risk better. Now, for me, I'm happy because I usually put my A and B options relatively close together, so I'm satisfied. If they choose B, I'm happy because that was my recommendation anyways. Now, if they choose C, how do you feel? Supported? Yeah, that's good. Should have asked for more? Yeah, good. There's a number of ways to think about this, yes. Now, sometimes I feel a little scared, to be honest, because usually the C for me is the stretch option. So if they pick C, I think, oh shoot, how are we going to accomplish all of these things? But it's a good situation to be in. All right? All right, so to summarize here, what did we talk about? Hey, it's not just about the technology. It's what you want to do is you need to build credibility, trust, and partnership with your executive team. By talking about things from a business perspective, hopefully, right, some of the simple tools that we've introduced here, like the 3D blueprint, the process for coming up with your plan to frame your program, your 30, 60, 90-day plan, the cyber framework formula, the maturity model, the strategy map, and the cyber risk map, right, hopefully, right, you're probably already doing these things or a number of these things at work, but this helps you codify in your mind a little bit more about how to make it a little bit more rigorous at work. All right, so with that, I'm going to pause here, right? This is the end here. If anybody would like to connect on LinkedIn or shoot me a note, I would love to stay in touch about your leadership journeys as well. Thank you very much.
Just want to take one question before we go. Changes in more recent years, and maybe take the industry yellow line. How do you determine where that is? And then we'll
now these are, I don't know how much time we have, but these are long questions. Now, maybe I'll do all 3 very quickly here. We'll try.
Okay.
The stretch goal here, the yellow line. Short answer, if you work at a large organization, you have to pay a third party for the yellow line. That's it. You usually have to pay some consulting company, some industry research organization, some large amount of money. At a large enterprise, I've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for that yellow line. Effective. I mean, they did a bunch of other stuff too, but you're paying for it because you've got the third-party rubber stamp of approval that this is the trusted yellow line. So executives and boards say, well, who came up with the yellow line? You don't want to say you made it up. You say, so-and-so gave it to me, and that's why it could be trusted. We could talk in more detail offline about this.
There was how it's changed over the years, and there's a middle one that I've forgotten too, so I don't know if anybody can remember.
The second question was, how do you get your team involved? The best part that I've seen them get involved, or getting them involved, is part of the planning process, the roadmap development process, is the brainstorming phase, right? Hey, everybody, what problems do you see? Turns out security people are good at finding that. And what are potential solutions? And you list all of those solutions, and then some of them you put in the last year of your roadmap. so that some people feel heard and seen, that you're taking their input into account into the plan itself. And the first question was?
Engaging. How has it changed in more recent years? That's a great question.
It's gotten more complicated, right, because of the increasing regulatory landscape that we mentioned, as evidenced by the fact that last year, 2 years ago, NIST added to the cybersecurity framework the govern function. That's an evidence of the fact that we as an industry are more mature, but the flip side is, hey, now it's maybe a little bit easier in the sense that senior leadership is now paying more attention because of all of these incidents, breaches, and events, but it's harder because it requires you to do things and use the tools like we talked about today to make your case from a business perspective.
You followed your own advice. We condensed what your 15 minutes should have been for questions into about 1, and you got it all in, which shows you can live and breathe your own advice. That was a masterclass in how to communicate with the C-suite. And I know you're a captive audience slightly because you've flown over for this, so I know you'll be available afterwards, and you've kindly offered your contact details. Frank, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you, Pierre. Appreciate it.